A New York City artist is found dead at a luxury spa in the Hamptons. But what exactly happened is still shrouded in mystery, as police say the culprit is also dead. This is a very strange situation as we discuss what his connection was to the victim, and will we ever really have answers? We're going to discuss it all with a former prosecutor turned defense attorney. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. I want to talk about Sabina Rosas, who also went by her given name Sabina Coromdel. She was a rising star in the art world. But sadly, as I say many times here on Sidebar, that was cut short. You see, the 33-year-old who lived in Brooklyn was found dead at the Shosugi Bon House. This is an expensive spa retreat in the Hamptons on Long Island. It's often frequented by celebrities. They say that each time you stay there, it costs over $1,000. And an employee found her dead in a guest house on Monday. Now, police haven't exactly said how she died, but they did say that she was, quote, a victim of violence. So it's now up to a medical examiner to determine more information, and we'll discuss if we will get that information and when we might get it. But as this wellness retreat was transformed into a crime scene, investigators then went to the home of a man who was connected to Sabina. His name is Thomas Gannon. He lived about 4 hours away from the spa in Honesdale, Pennsylvania. That's about 200 miles away. And what do they find when they arrive at his place? The 56-year-old is dead. And they say it was from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. So investigators believe that Gannon is responsible for Sabina's death. The coroner for Wayne County, Pennsylvania, Edward Howell, told the news outlet The Independent that Gannon, quote, confessed to committing the homicide immediately prior to taking his own life. The coroner said that he, quote, confirmed the confession by reading a message the decedent sent to a family member immediately prior to his death. Now, rumors have been swirling about what exactly this connection was between Sabina and Gannon. Was he I hate to use this phrase, but was he, quote, a sugar daddy? Were they in a romantic relationship? Was he just kind of an art benefactor who invested in her, that he was invested in her success? It's not clear. And of course, that all seems to depend on who you talk to. You see, Sabina was apparently in a long-term relationship with another man, a man named Ryder Iwata, a fashion designer who she met at SUNY Purchase, also known as Purchase College, back in 2016. He spoke with the New York Post, calling Sabina, quote, the greatest love of his life and his greatest friend, and he called Gannon's alleged actions wicked and cowardly. Claims he only met Gannon once and got some kind of weird vibes from him. Iwata says that by taking his own life, Gannon has deprived Sabina's family and friends from ever knowing the full story. And that's a really, really important point that we're going to dive into. Now, Suffolk County Police, they didn't confirm this relationship between Sabina and Gannon, but they did say it was, quote, domestic in nature. Iwata told the New York Post that he didn't believe the relationship between Sabina and Gannon was romantic. But according to Liz Phillips, who's Sabina's art teacher, mentor, friend, Gannon was essentially obsessed with Sabina. She told CBS News on Wednesday that, quote, he had money and he wanted to help her and he wanted to be with her all the time. Phillips also said that Gannon gave her the creeps. And this Pennsylvania man's apparent generosity was on full display when Sabina announced that she was raising money to go to Portugal next month for her first artist residency. She said the trip was a birthday gift, but when you read the GoFundMe page now, it's almost kind of chilling in a way, because in the description of the fundraiser, Sabina wrote, as I approach my 33rd birthday, I can't help but chuckle at the fact that 33 is often associated with the age of Jesus when he made his ultimate sacrifice. While I'm not planning anything dramatic, I see this year as a turning point in my life. And maybe not surprisingly, it appears that Thomas Gannon was the biggest donor to that GoFundMe. This is according to the website. It appears that he made a donation of $1,000 2 months ago, writing, you have an amazing gift, and soon all the world will see. I love you. By the way, Thomas Gannon doesn't really have much of a criminal record that we could find. I mean, we put his name and location into the search on Truthfinder, and this powerful background checker only returned information about a few traffic citations. And by the way, Law&Crime, we partner with Truthfinder. We use it to get details on the people involved in our stories. And even if you don't work in true crime, it can just be an amazing resource to give you some peace of mind when you think about it. Why? Because it's one of the largest public record search services in the United States. And with a paid subscription service, you can get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. And right now, you can get 50% off of your first month of confidential background reports. So if you're interested, go to truthfinder.com/LC-Sidebar. Okay, let's get back into this. There's another haunting image that I want to talk about. It's this mugshot of Sabina from March of 2023, and in it, she has a black eye. The mugshot was reportedly taken in Miami when Sabina was charged with battery, but I'll tell you the exact circumstances of what that arrest was about and what might have come from any sort of criminal case. We weren't really able to find any record of it on the Miami-Dade court website. But here's what we do know. Sabina was born in Tajikistan in Central Asia, fled with her family during a civil war. She lived in Europe. She returned back to her country for a time before moving to the United States when she was 17 years old. She co-founded an art publication called Ruyo Journal, which shared this heartfelt message on Wednesday. Driven by her incredible energy and vision, Sabina moved walls so that gardens could flourish, inviting everyone seeking light. She shared everything she had and supported all of us. A beautiful soul and a gifted artist, she left an impactful legacy in the arts of Central Asia. The world feels empty without her. We love you, Sabina. Rest in peace. And Sabina's family, they also released a statement saying, as the eldest of 3 daughters, Sabina brought excitement, adventure, joy, and love to our family. We are devastated by this senseless loss and ask for privacy as we navigate this incredibly difficult time. We urge anyone with information regarding the circumstances of Sabina's death to come forward and assist the ongoing investigations. Your support during this challenging time is a testament to just how special Sabina was and will remain. And after the autopsy, family members, they plan to have her body returned to her home country of Tajikistan for a memorial. So really sad case, and I want to delve into it a little bit more. Let me bring in my friend. I haven't seen her in quite some time. Criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, Julie Rendelman. Julie, so good to see you. Thanks for taking the time. First, you're from New York. The thing that shocked me, and we'll talk about the initial impressions of the case, is this happened in the Hamptons, like essentially the Hamptons, right? Watermill. And this kind of stuff doesn't necessarily happen. It's kind of shocking when you think about the location of where this occurred.
Sure. Look, Watermill is in the Hamptons. It's an area where the well-heeled go during the summers and actually into the fall as well. And it's considered quite quiet. This is not an area where people worry too much about crime. And the specific location where this happened is a wellness retreat. It's a place where people go to relax, to get massages, to get the best nutrients and exercise. So it really is a shock. And I can only imagine what the individual felt like when they found her at this retreat.
How far do you think this investigation goes? You have somebody who it looks like police are saying is the killer. He's dead. How far does this investigation go?
So I think many people think, oh, they found him dead, that we're finished and there's nothing left to do. And that's just not correct. The police still want to establish that he is in fact the person that committed this crime. And I think they also want answers, not just for law enforcement, but they want it for the family, who probably feel, on top of the incredible loss, an incredible feeling of anger that because he's taken his life, they may not get those answers. So I think the autopsy is going to reveal quite a lot in terms of obviously the manner of death, and may lead them to that conclusion, which I think that they already probably have, which is that he is the person responsible. I think there's also going to be some why questions that they want to answer, and that's going to be something that law enforcement is going to do, again, not just for themselves, but for the family who want answers.
The fact that, unless we are disputing the findings that he took his own life, if he took his own life, that's evidence of consciousness of guilt, right? Or that could be.
Absolutely. And remember, they have video of him leaving by himself from the retreat. So it's not like, there was someone that took him out of there and that was kidnapping him. It seems clear, at least from the evidence we have so far, that his manner of death, and remember also that he contacted someone before he allegedly committed suicide to what he had done.
Can you talk about that again? Let me reiterate it in case, because I provided a lot of information. But again, the coroner in Pennsylvania told The Independent that Gannon, quote, confessed to committing the homicide immediately prior to taking his own life, that he confirmed the confession by reading a message the decedent sent to a family member immediately prior to his death. What do you make of that? What is that?
It's consciousness of guilt. I think anytime you have these confessions prior to death, we consider it consciousness of guilt. Could someone confess that didn't do a crime? Certainly. But I think that especially because, remember, he's the only person that had access to her in the retreat. He's the person that left by himself, leaving her behind. And then we have him hours later committing suicide. I think that, again, these are all pieces of evidence that law enforcement are going to use to establish that he is the person responsible for this crime.
And it's interesting because you hear the frustration when somebody does this, that you're never going to get the full story because that person's not here. And yet that message could have been some window into what happened here, right? I mean, the idea of he's admitting it, you don't always have that. So I'm curious what that message is and how much it's being analyzed by investigators.
You know, it seems like the law enforcement didn't have to look far to figure out who the person was that was responsible. And obviously this gives law enforcement answers as to who did it. But I think this wasn't a whodunit from the start. And I think the frustration for the family is even when someone survives and goes to trial, we don't necessarily ever hear what the reason was that they committed this crime. Right. But at least there's a chance they will. And instead now they have to literally put the pieces together to make up their own version as to why this person would take the life of their loved one.
Do you know when would we get the medical examiner's findings about what happened to Sabina? And so what's that time frame, and how quickly could the family know? How quickly could us, the public, know?
So I think the family's going to know obviously much quicker than we do. Law enforcement is going to know quicker than the family. And so a medical examiner in terms of an autopsy is fairly quick. It usually happens within the week. And then there's someone usually that reviews the medical examiner's findings to make sure they're accurate. And so I think that the family's going to have answers quite quickly. We, the public, are going to have answers shortly thereafter.
Because when you have, like in this example, 2 people dead, and there's going to be no criminal case by all accounts, do investigators, law enforcement, prosecutors, are they more open with that information?
It's a good question. I think one of the things they want is the public to provide them with also additional information as to the why. Is it possible that he's the victim of a homicide? It's possible. I think from all accounts, it doesn't look like that's the case. But again, it doesn't mean that law enforcement just stops there because he left a confession and he's now dead. I think they still want the answers before they close their case.
I'm still confused about his relationship. What stands out to you about that? With Sabina, I still don't quite understand it.
So look, people have relationships all the time that they keep very quiet. You talked about the idea, and we hated to use that word, sugar daddy. We just don't know what their relationship was. We certainly know she had a long-term relationship with someone else. And we know that they both ended up at a fairly expensive retreat quite recently in the Hamptons. Keep in mind that often if you go to some area like that in the fall in the Hamptons, you probably are in a position where you want to keep things quiet because it's not going to be incredibly crowded during that period of time. So that may give some sense of where they were in their relationship. And
I saw reporting that she didn't introduce Gannon as her love interest. And that's probably why you're seeing these kind of mixed reactions from people, mixed responses from people about who exactly he was and why he, got involved in her life.
Sure. I mean, we know that he gave the money for the GoFundMe. We know actually that he even provided an indication as to his feelings to her. Is it possible that his feelings were stronger than hers? Anything's possible. One of the things the autopsy is going to be able to provide to us, not definitively, but it will tell us maybe, is this a crime of passion? For example, was she strangled? Was she beaten? Also, keep in mind, his body is going to be telling. Does he have injuries on him? Does he have scratch marks? Anything that indicates that there was a struggle prior to him killing himself.
Because all the authorities have said it was domestic violence, right? And what does that mean?
I think they called it a domestic relationship. And so when they called domestic relationship, it sounds to me like that's an indication that this was someone that was in a relationship with someone else. And to be frank, Jesse, we don't normally go to a spa like this unless we're with our best friend, which it doesn't sound like by all accounts they were. And so it sounds more like an intimate relationship when you're going to this type of retreat. Again, anything's possible, but it does lead us to believe that there was more going on than simply a friendship.
Yeah, I'll be more accurate. They said it was domestic in nature, but and again, I don't even know what that. Yeah, no, that was my fault. And I don't think that they even know. We don't even know exactly what the room was like or what that scene looked like. We're kind of having a sense of it. Let me ask you this: the Miami incident where she has this black eye from last year. How much is that being investigated and tied to her death?
Well, I think they know much more than we know. And the question naturally is who gave her that black eye and why was she arrested? And so if the individual that was found dead is the person that was involved in that domestic incident, then that's going to be quite telling as to where their relationship was a year later. Now, it's also possible that this involves someone else. It could be a bar fight for all we know. But it's something that, again, authorities are going to look at to see if that leads them to any answers in regards to this case.
Do prosecutors have any involvement in this, or is it just all law enforcement?
That's another great question. And so when I was a homicide prosecutor and there was a homicide that led to potentially a suicide, we went out and we did investigation. We went to the location to see if there was any missing pieces that we thought needed to be investigated. So I'm not sure that they take the forefront to these cases, but they, just like law enforcement, want to make sure that the person who has killed themselves is in fact the person responsible for her death.
One other thing I want to ask you about, Julie, is there is an important figure in this Uber driver. So apparently it's being reported that Gannon left this wellness retreat, ordered an Uber, took him, again, like 200 miles to Pennsylvania. It was like a $370 trip. The Uber driver said that didn't even leave him a tip at the end. He looked miserable. He didn't say much, looked exhausted, agitated. This was his observations of Gannon, but didn't observe any kind of blood on his clothes. I think that's really interesting. The fact that this Uber driver plays a central role, but also the fact that if Gannon did this, he takes, calls an Uber to take him all the way to Pennsylvania.
Remember, the Uber driver didn't know what had happened, so he may not be looking for signs that the person he's driving back to Pennsylvania just committed a murder. So he might not be as attentive. He might now be being asked questions that, in hindsight, he now realizes were relevant. I think that the most significant part of this whole thing is that he leaves by himself. And we know that she is never seen again until she's found in the room. And so it gives authorities the clear indication that he's the person that left her behind. Obviously, if he had seen blood, that would have been something we would assume he would have noticed, or if he had gashes on his face or his arms, that would be something an Uber driver would notice. But it also gives a little insight into the mindset of Gannon at the time he was leaving. The agitation, the stress, and potentially whether he was making any calls along the way.
Yeah, I know this is going to continue to be investigated, and I just hope for the family's sake they get some answers because they really deserve it. This is such a chilling case, and as I talked about just even a little bit, she touched so many people's lives. She had such an important impact and powerful impact on people's lives, and I just hope that we all get some more answers as to what happened to her because it's a really, really strange case. Julie Rendelman, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming on. I know there wasn't a lot of information to work with, but really did give us a behind-the-scenes look about what investigators and law enforcement and prosecutors might be doing. So, Julie, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.